while thanking both speakers for exceptional time discipline, but I reprove them for not having a sufficiently high level of interpersonal conflict. And so I would like to begin by asking Jason about something very specific that Charlie said, that there was basically a 5-to-1 limit, that the EROI falls below that rate of return, then profitability is likely to disappear.
Of companies getting the oil.
Of companies getting the oil. What happens then? I mean, what's your view of that that analysis and that particular implication?
I don't need this, but they say the recordings guys do. Wait a minute, I got another one of those things in my pocket. It doesn't stay up by my mouth.
Good. So, I'm not familiar with this concept. Yeah, I don't have a view on the energy return on investment. What I can tell you are a few things that I would respond to. And, you know, the first is that, gosh, where do I begin? You know, the economy isn't just about what's in your wallet or this sort of thing. You know, going back to Rousseau, who is looked at as one of the first philosophers in which economics is drawn, it was always about stuff. But it's not just things that make an economy. I think we're going to see potentially bigger problems in the future around water than we see around oil. I'm concerned about all sorts of things, but it's, you know, it's not just about the goods that are produced in an economy. It is about the scarcity of resources at the end of the day, and I find it very hard to think it's not about goods, and whether you believe economics is a discipline or not, you know, the truth is that it's a framework for helping people think about how goods are exchanged. It's a way to think about how activities occur at the margin. It's about you know, how to think about the relationships in markets. And they're very often guidelines rather than strict rules. I speak of this from the point of an economic practitioner, someone who looks at these things and is expected to make not only insightful or interesting, but also accurate statements to corporate clients that are trying to make real-world decisions, not decisions out while fishing. But you know, I would say that this is how I view the world, and that it's just a framework.
To call in the cavalry, at least in a spiritual sense, because my great-grandfather was a pioneer of exactly this sort of biophysical research. And he was using the insights of thermodynamics in the late 19th century, the man who developed the thermal calorimeter and the measurement of the energy content of food. His name was Wilbur Owen Atwater. So you have 2 against 1 on that issue.
Since I have also
the pedagogical value of fishing.
Oh, that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoy fishing too, but you know, and I think, look, analogies are great for any kind of framework, and whether it's you're talking about fishing or you're talking about marginal cost curves or supply and demand, it's, you know, it's really, you know, it's to help you think about a framework. And at the end of the day, it's funny because even though Charlie would argue very harshly against economics, it is about, well, how does the substitution of things work? How does the efficiency work? How does the margin, what are things like at the margin? And these are really things that economics as a discipline are designed to help you think about. So it's very interesting. While sticking to any of the regimented rules and saying this is always how it is, there's always a substitute, we definitely will find the technology. It's very likely we could not. But oh, great.
I haven't had a word. I think there are some universals, and it's called the second law of thermodynamics, and I don't know very many others. I've spent my lifetime studying both natural ecosystems and oil and human-dominated ecosystems, and the more I study them, the more I find so much being the same. And that's a longer discussion over a beer, but I think that my interest in fish has led to all kinds of insights. And if you are academically toilet trained as a conventional economist, there's no hope. Because you start with assumptions that are, in my opinion, simply not true. And if you start to question them, then you cannot go on and get your PhD.
John, I'd like to press you a little bit, because I think you did the easy job here of providing a critique of neoclassical economics.
I admit it's easy.
By no means the first. But at the same time, we are now, if you are right, on the edge of the curve, looking down and facing a situation which is dramatically different. And the main way in which it's different is that, to put it in biophysical terms, the cost of getting resources is getting too high in relation to what you get out of it, right? Which is why those people in the photograph you have of the pumping oil by hand were so thin. Right? So, question, where do you take it from here? What are the policy implications of that situation? What do you have to do to deal with it in your view?
Well, I have a number of my students and former students in the audience, and they are always angry at me because I don't take policy positions. And I'm not doing this for a policy position. I'm doing this as a scientist. And it's interesting, when I go and analyze fish migration, nobody ever asks me what's the policy implications of the salmon for changes in productivity in a certain part of the North Pacific Ocean. So because humans are involved, somehow people think, therefore, I have to have a policy. I leave policy up to others. I try to get the science right as best I can. Is that a cop-out?
It is a cop-out.
My students say that too.
Jason, you have a comment?
Well, first I need a microphone.
You do.
Thank you. So what I would say here is, I think you're thinking completely wrong about the value of oil. Completely wrong. It's not about getting the barrel out, it's about the marginal differential of the arbitrage between goods in different places. And it's not just isolated within the United States. And so when we think about what's that value, it's very cheap on a hydrocarbon basis. The value is huge, and the truth is you're probably not going to ever be putting in a barrel of oil to get out a barrel of oil. You'll be putting in a barrel of oil equivalent of some other kind of energy form to explicitly get out that barrel of oil, but you probably won't actually be putting in a physical barrel of oil to get out a physical barrel. As long as that's the case, and the transportation arb of that is going to be greater than the value of energy generated from the other sources, you're going to continue to extract oil, as long as there's any marginal value in either the transport arb value or the arb between the other energy sources used to extract it.
I rest my case.
I mean, I answer the question. Well, I'm asking you about the arbitrage value between the transport of the physical goods and the differentiation in the energy value.
Well, the only problem with what you say is that 2/3, I'm including gas in here, but
well, let's not include gas. Let's just talk about oil.
Right. It's our most important fuel. It's almost 40% of the energy that we use.
We're talking oil, not gas.
I'm
just
talking oil.
Okay.
Oil, 40%, more or less, 38 or 39% of the energy we use is oil. Oh, so we're going to take coal and use it to get oil out of the ground at 1 barrel of oil for 1 heat equivalent of oil for or whatever, 2 heat equivalents of coal? Yeah, we could do that. We may be doing that. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. Now, it isn't going to be a very nice economy that if we're doing that. But sure, we could do that. I've got no problem with that.
Well, I think you will agree
And
that
that
I
answers
did
the
a pretty
question.
good job of provoking a little,
Get Tad in the back.
a little conflict. And what I want to do now is, with the remaining half hour, to challenge the audience to do as well as I just did in getting our speakers riled up. Sir, you have the first effort.
Where's the other one? One of them didn't work. Do you have the one that works? This one is the only one that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, give it to.
So we're going to run back and forth.
We are seeing the consequence of a declining energy source, namely the
would,
power.
is this working? Okay. I would like to suggest that the largest failure of classical economics in the last century,
Classical or neoclassical?
I'll put both of them in there, is not the ones within the time frame of the last 100 years. Given the actual resources available on Earth, the technology we develop and everything, the largest failure of classical and neoclassical economics was not to account for what actually happened. And I would also suggest that biophysical economics, as far as you've developed it, would not have worked either. And that is, the classical economists don't know how to account for what happens when there is a shortage of demand for labor inputs into goods and services, because that's really explains what happened with the Great Depression and in 2008. We didn't really run out of anything. What we had a shortage of was demand for labor inputs into goods and services. And that threw the economy into a tailspin.
$150 oil had nothing to do with 2008?
I'd love to say something. Thank you. You know, on top of that, I would say clearly. You know, on top of that, I would say clearly overspending beyond your means for a significant period of time, not only on oil, but on other things, and mispriced credit markets that clearly could never happen again. Oh, wait, happened in Europe. Oh, it could never happen again, our own debt. You know, but let's not worry about that. That had nothing to do with it either. You know, I think that that this is a very common problem in the business cycle where you just at some point are ahead of your skis.
Get Tad in the back. I'd like to say is that anytime you overspend is you're spending more money than you have energy to back it.
Well, we're on that. If I could just ask both of you to comment briefly on this question of financialization, because one of the things that did happen in 2008 was you had a tremendous run-up and then a collapse in the price.
Well,
and part of that, it has been argued, is due to the fact that you had commodity investors, speculators, basically driving up inventories and giving you, in addition to a high average price, also a lot more volatility. Is that correct, and what are the implications?
I was working on a number of trading desks at the time. You know, what I will tell you is that financial markets. I mean, when I was a young budding economist, right out of school, and maybe believed more rigidly things that Charlie argues against. I worked on a trading floor, and someone came up to me and said, "You know, you do some pretty good forecasts." He said, "But you know." What are the two things that really drive the markets? And I said, well, supply and demand. And he looked at me and said, oh man, I thought you were a good economist. They're fear and greed. And in 2008, everybody was greedy for everything, not just commodities, it was everything. And then at some point, the markets just, the technical term for this is puked out. And, you know, at this point, we're still too fearful, I think, but high energy prices definitely played a role, but a lot of things played a role in just overexposing markets that couldn't bear the weight of what was thrown on their backs.
Charlie, you want to comment on that?
I think I'm in complete agreement. I mean, you know that world better than I, but it's perfectly logical from my perspective.
All right. Sir. Microphone coming. We're economizing on microphones.
This is what happens after peak microphone. It seems to me that one of the chief economic problems with mispricing oil has been the failure of either that it's marginally priced at basically at the production level. So we don't have a way of pricing either depletion over the long term or waste, particularly right now climate. And so how can we have a market-driven system that ignores two huge costs involved in the basic energy system?
Short answer, we can't. You have a...
Yeah, no, my answer is that in any economic framework, for decades, people talk about the externalities, the costs to energy and other things that are not fully priced into what you pay. And, you pay for them or you pay for them. And that's kind of how that works. On the decline curve side, I would tell you financial markets pricing sometimes does weird stuff. Forward curves are historically very poor predictors of price. And I spent a couple days this week meeting with 14 different clients in Houston. And they're all in the energy space. And the conversation was, why is the WTI Brent spread likely to narrow next year? The forward curve for WTI, is pretty flat. Why in the world would in 2014 or 15 you see the price of WTI be right where Brent is? And the answer is that the forward curves are wrong, and that the forward curves are pricing in an interest rate differential in the future off of the current spot price. And they're not appropriately pricing in the actual physical moves that are going to happen of a reintegration of WTI with the Gulf Coast when the Seaway pipeline opens in 2013, and they're only going to believe it when the physical barrels start flowing. So is the market efficient? Well, from a cost of capital standpoint, you're pricing in the forward curve off a differential of interest rates off the spot, whereas they're not fully prepared to price in future months off of this physical action because they're just not willing to price it in. And financial markets can remain irrational far longer than we can remain solvent.
Which still raises a question, and I'll come to another question momentarily, but what do you do about these vast externalities, including climate? I mean, again, Charlie wants to avoid policy questions. I don't see how you're going to...
I go fishing.
Huh?
Fishing is a fine idea when
The
faced
answer
with
is there's
such
no
a
solution. So, right in here, in the middle.
Well, wait a minute. There is no solution. Of course there's a solution. Okay. The solution is that in here I believe in markets. The markets will adjust, and civilization will stumble forward, and we'll have, I would guess, a lot less affluence. And how are we going, if the pie is no longer growing, we have 45 of 50 states are broke. The federal government is in a sense broke, well, clearly broke. My university is broke, your university is broke, pension plans are broke. And how come all of this happened? I've got some additional slides in there, and it shows the growth of the U.S. economy since the Great Depression, and it goes down every decade like that. It's a stair step. And you plot the growth of oil over the same time period, and it's the same graph. What's going on? Well, I think we know what's going on. You can't invest in anymore, maybe you can, in the stock market in general and expect to get the old 3 or 5 or 10% real return every year on the average that like everybody used to. Why? Well, the economy, I think, is not growing, and please, somebody ask about this question of efficiency.
Before we move on, I want to add something about the externalities question.
Let's go on and get another question. We've got a lot of people who want to participate. Go ahead.
A popular idea these days is that crude oil prices can only go so high because they will induce the next global recession.
I think.
The question, the answer I'm fishing for is, first of all, what do you think the number is? Do you think that $147 in 2008 was actually the catalyst that caused the credit crisis? But more importantly, how would you model that going forward? How would you develop a model for forecasting what that number is on a go-forward basis?
I'll be real quick here and then hand it over to you, but I don't want to discount greed and corruption and financial malfeasance. There's quite a lot of that in there. You can get away with that when you're pumping more oil out of the ground every year. It's tougher when you're not pumping more oil out of the ground every year.
I would add two things. On the greed side, by the way, it's not just the big banks or the big investors or the big funds. We all want to see our 401ks, IRAs, retirement money, stock price. We all want to see that money go up, right? I mean, some of the who are the biggest buyers? Y'all might not know who some of the biggest buyers of the ABS MBS debt were. Well, not only that, they were German Sparkassen and Landesbanken were some of the biggest buyers, right? They had a very conservative mandate of what they could buy, and of course the credit rating agencies had essentially there was a misalignment of incentives since they're publicly traded and people buy their research and they sell research, but you can only sell research if the credit rating is high enough where institutional investors and others are interested in it. So there's actually an incentive to give as high a rating as possible, to sell as much research as possible, because as a ratings agency, your job is to sell research, and that's in the best interest of the defense of shareholder value. As far as was it the high price of oil that caused the last crash? I will tell you that in August of 2007, a year before you had those oil prices, the writing was on the wall. I personally sat on the big corporate risk committee of a large investment bank, and I will tell you, in August of 2007, we knew it was over.
I would just interject parenthetically that I have an article with fellow economist with a biophysical persuasion named Jing Chen in the Cambridge Journal of Economics that makes the opposite argument from the one you just made, Charlie, about the relationship between fraud and energy surplus. Our argument is that enforcement is more rigorous when you have a substantial surplus. When you run close to the margin, then the pressure is on to relax surveillance and to allow entities to cook the books to give the impression that they're earning the rates of return that they were previously earning. And that's our interpretation of the secret.
From my interactions with corporate clients that are interested in doing cost leadership projects to improve their margins, to get to a better EROI, that happens when the price actually is lower. So I actually would come in on Charlie's camp.
We'll see. Okay. Sir. That's all right, he's got the microphone, we'll come back to you next.
So I went through the heat anger already, so I'm trying to kind of, be gentle. Think of this, and this was described in a book by Philip Mirowski, More Heat Than Light, which is a book about neoclassical or modern economics. And in fact, in that book, he lays a very clear case for the economists. In fact, the early ones were all engineers, civil engineers and mechanical engineers, because they were the ones who actually could understand the math but did not understand the physics. Economics, as its very foundations, appropriated the Lagrangian formalism of reversible mechanics with no friction. Okay? That's what economics is. The next century was spent trying to fight that fact behind lots of books on economics. And so the whole construct in which the value is potential energy and the money flow is the kinetic energy, and both are conserved in effect in various aspects of economics theories, in fact, the whole construct is wrong, period. So whatever follows from that construct is wrong, period. So we are squabbling about something that actually should not exist. So when we are exchanging those views, we are kind of saying, oh, the earth is flat, and I think I can have 4 angels on tip of my pin. And no, it's 5 angels. No, it's 6. And and instead of saying, now, let's do away with this crap, and let's do something different, which is actually what was the subject, I think, a little bit of the previous session, where we are trying to essentially distill real life and put it back into economics. And that's, I think, what Charlie is doing. So all this fancy terminology about marginal this and that, that's all very nice. But it does not hold in a world in which everything else is changing. And in fact, that's what we're seeing. And our econometric models are actually pretty bad at describing anything, no matter what the other gentleman is saying here. Thank you.
Sir. I'll just add an endorsement of Borowski's book. It has one of the nicest passages in it describes the correspondence between some of the early classical economists and the physicists of the day, revealing that they really didn't understand what we're talking about. Sir, sorry, and then I'll come to you.
I'd like to ask Mr. Schenker to clarify one of his earlier answers. Should I repeat that?
Yes.
I would like to ask Mr. Schenker to clarify one of his earlier answers. The Gallup organization now has the ability to conduct surveys worldwide. And they recently did so, and they found the following facts. The population is essentially 7 billion people. Essentially 5 billion of them are of working age. Essentially 3 billion of them say they would like a minimal job that occupies them for 32 or more hours a week and sends them home with a paycheck on Friday evening. Unfortunately, there are only 1.2 billion such jobs in the world. Now, are you telling me that that 1.8 billion shortfall in jobs is merely a dip in the business cycle and that we can expect it to be rectified in the near future?
So I'm not sure. I have a feeling that I have a feeling that in this most recent business cycle, 1.8 billion jobs were not lost. So what I would say here is there have been increases, say, domestically in, or huge declines in the labor force participation rate, especially for young people, with the risks in all of the major OECD economies to their entitlement systems. There is a risk that older workers will stay longer, so that if these numbers are accurate, and I haven't seen this report, there's actually going to become an exacerbated problem of youth, not only unemployment or underemployment, but even youth ability to access labor markets in the US and elsewhere. You're going to have further wage compression in the US and other OECD countries. And if these numbers are right, you know, idle hands are the work of the devil, and I think you run a real risk then of other sort of social problems. But with that many people in those young age groups, it definitely bodes for higher energy consumption, especially in emerging markets. You know, if you look at penetration of autos, even if people say they want a job or they get a paycheck on Friday, the numbers of those jobs are still going to go up in a significant fashion, even if not everyone who wants look, you know, I'd love a high-paying job that paid great wage. It was 32 hours a week, and I didn't have to work hard, and I could just call it a day on Friday. But if that's what people are saying they all want, I mean, I'm not surprised that would be the answer, but I don't know if people really know what it's going to take to have a very successful career in the future. I don't know how the Gallup poll phrased the questions. I would need more information to make an assessment on these numbers.
Charlie.
The study in general.
I'd just like to introduce people to Jack Alper. We stand up, Jack, because Jack says if you don't worry about population, you're not going to solve any other problem. So you don't have to say anything, Jack. If you want to say something? So, I mean, I think that the population issue, you know, the PMAT equation, pollution is equal to number of people times per capita affluence times technology. In this country, we cannot talk about population and we cannot talk about affluence. So we're only left in talking about how to fix our pollution problems and so forth with technology, which actually goes both ways. So we cannot have a national discussion on this. We don't have discussions on this in our university. In most of our universities, we teach our young people fairy tales. So what hope is there until we deal with all those situations?
Sir.
In 2005 and 2006, many people saw the writing on the wall, but few were able to support this by a model of how the economy works. In a paper, no one saw this coming. A few people were cited that had a model called a post-Keynesian dynamic systems or accounting model, such as Dean Baker, Michael Hudson, Steve Keen of Australia, Nouriel Roubini, Peter Schiff, Robert Schiller. I would argue that they, beyond being the neoclassicals, who are really geocentric, that believe the Earth is the center of the universe, they're at least heliocentric, and they believe that the Earth travels around the sun. But they don't seem to account, what Charlie is saying, energy into the equation. They do account money, debt, and banks, which is unlike the neoclassicals. I'm wondering, what really is the most accurate economic modeling we can get to, and how are we going to get to that, and how are we going to integrate energy into post-Keynesian economics?
I'd like to make a comment and introduce my colleague, Jamie, because I was riding, the last time I saw him, I was riding in a taxi with him to the airport in Washington, D.C., and we'd been at an economics conference together, and I said to him, well, Jamie, does that mean you are a neo-Keynesian? And he looked at me very, very confused. And he spent a little time, and he says, what do you mean neo? Remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that.
So I thought he should take this question.
The people I think are most relevant in the list you gave were Steve Keen, and there was one other. Schiff and Schiller are really quite different. Michael Hudson, yes. The group that you're talking about are basically working in the tradition of the British economist Wynne Godley, whose insistence was on economic models that were stock flow consistent, that is to say, which paid attention to the accounting consistencies that should be respected. This is a step in the right direction. It enables you to see when things are going way out of line with historical patterns and to examine those situations for stresses. It does not get you to an integration of the geophysical underlying realities into the economic framework. And that is a definite challenge facing the post-Keynesian tradition. One of the very interesting things that's going on is that institutionally, post-Keynesians and biophysical economists are coming together under the rubric of the Association for Evolutionary Economics, which was the old institutionalist organization, of which, as it happens, this year I am the president. So I assure you that all future intellectual progress will come out of this particular confluence of forces, so you can have at least some grounds for a minor amount of optimism. Sir.
So let's get back to financialization. Do you think there's excess speculation that's driving volatility? Does it need to get reined in? And is the only mechanism to rein it in increasing margin requirements, reducing leverage, or how would you effectively do that? If there is a problem, if you agree there's a problem.
So there is significant volatility in a number of commodity markets. The argument to, and there's already moves to sort of change. God, this is awful. There are a number of. Can I need some other kind of money? There already are a number of moves to address this, and a number of financial institutions that in many ways looked more like energy companies that also had a bank are being forced to unwind some of their physical positions in which they were trying to really optimize around assets in the way that utilities and energy companies put icing on a cake, but instead focusing on the icing rather than the cake itself. The benefit of having liquid and deep markets despite how volatile they may be, is that it does allow, especially companies that want to engage in risk management, to actively and easily access these markets. Whether it should be changed, changes are already coming in a significant fashion. And I can tell you that markets that are less liquid, like some of the metals, the volatility can be worse. And the truth is, if there was a more liquid market in the way oil is liquid, it would probably be a better advantage to those companies that are in those markets, if that makes sense.
Okay, let me go here. We have time, I think, for 2 more. So I'll take you, and I'll take you, maybe 3.
You've got time, Dr.
All right. Let me stress people's patience too much.
Okay, I'm not sure which side of the divide this comes to, but looking at it from a practical point of view, and I do have a more engineering science background, the diversion of resources from consumption to long-lived, energy-producing, preferably renewable, and energy-efficient infrastructure is the best public policy going forward. And in other words, simply reduce the percentage of GDP devoted to consumption, increase the percentage of GDP devoted to energy efficiency and energy production, particularly non-depletable energy production. And any thoughts on?
How can we argue with that? I mean, it's tough. We all know that the alternatives, solar alternatives, et cetera, are tough in the financial markets, and I believe that they're tough because they don't have as high ROI as some of the dirtier stuff like coal. So maybe it comes to an issue of should we be putting more externalities into our physical and financial assessments. I've got no problem with that. But we have a situation where the world thinks they're owed consumption, and consumption has stopped growing in Europe, in the US, in Japan for 2 decades, and they've lost not 1 decade but 2. This is a new ballgame. And we think that there are physical reasons for it. There's lots of oil in the world, but there's not lots of high EROI oil, and the alternatives aren't so great either. So how are we going to go from here, especially when we're not even doing the analyses, in my opinion? We don't support our universities in their energy programs. If we do, we say, oh, let the market take care of it. Somehow, all of the market economics has captured the stage when we should be having discussions. I don't like to use my science to defend this point of view or that. I like to use it to try to get at what the actual situation is. And I think in general, we don't know these things because we don't train young people to think, in my sense, but perhaps yours too, properly, how to think about the problems.
My thoughts on this is that oil is still too cheap. You know, you say, oh, renewables, it'd be great, it's the best thing. As Charlie pointed out, the EROI is not there. You can throw on, you can
quite say that.
You can throw on the carbon tax. You can increase the regulation. You can raise the cost. You can increase the externalities, or you can wait for the price of oil to rise. But the truth is, oil is still too cheap for the return on investment for alternative energy to make sense without subsidies in many different cases.
You're only addressing the minor part. I think the larger emphasis should be on increasing energy efficiency.
Well, yeah. So at the end of the day, there's 2 ways to lose weight: diet and exercise. And right now, we are addicted to oil, and we have been living high on the hog. And there are 2 ways out of it: we consume less, and we try to we need to either produce more or substitute out something for it. And that's the only 2 ways out.
So watch out for Jevons paradox.
While the microphone is going over to the other side of the room, why don't you say a word about?
Oh, it's a lot, but it's this When Stanley Javon's long story, it was a beautiful story.
The
When
microphone
Javon-
has arrived, so.
All right, when England made steam engines more efficient, they became cheaper, and it ended up using more oil, more coal.
Yeah, Charlie just sort of attacked my question. I was going to ask specifically, I just did an analysis a couple months ago, so I wanted to throw this at Jason and see what his thoughts were in general. Since 1950, average US vehicle miles per gallon has gone from about 12 miles per gallon to about 22.5. But driving miles per capita has over tripled from 3,000 to about 10,000. And therefore, you had a slide that said when fuel efficiency goes up, demand will go down. When clearly over the last 50 years, 60 years, that hasn't happened. Except the exact opposite has happened. I was just wondering, how does your economic background confront data like that?
Well, when I look at the miles driven and I look at the miles per capita, I think some of this, I would have to look at the numbers. Right, yeah, on your computer. I do a lot of work in the auto sector, and so I would have to look at some of the auto models I've done in the past. What I would say is even though the miles per gallon number's gone up significantly, there were also time periods when that number went the other way. You might recall at the turn of the last decade where you had SUVs wildly outpacing cars because of the profitability. You might remember there was this entire swath of time when the logic, the way it was marketed to the American public was big car like big house, better than small house. So big car, huge SUV, right? What were the biggest costs? Steel, not much, marginal cost increase over a car. Labor and pensions, right? So that was the biggest cost. The marketing cost, some of the other parts, the difference in the cost between a car and an SUV was so marginal that, of course, it was in the best interest of the companies to sell the big SUV, which cost only a little more to make, but was wildly profitable. So that also, creates kind of a kink. It's not just one straight line to more fuel efficiency. There's actually that period of time when it kind of kinked out.
The vehicle cost per mile on an inflation-adjusted basis in 1999 is the lowest in U.S. history. It made total economic sense in 1999 to buy that SUV.
So I remember when it was less than $1 a gallon. It was awesome.
So I'd like to ask the panel a question about the relative effects of all this on different countries. And you showed a slide, Jason, that showed how the United States has become less oil intensive as an economy, or we get more dollars per barrel or fewer barrels per dollar. But we're still, the gap between us and most other industrialized countries is still high. So are we more oil vulnerable when prices go up?
Yep.
Will we be less competitive?
Yeah, so the answer there is yes. What I often tell people when we talk about Europe is I say that the euro is the Eurozone's ugly baby. And they're forced to love it because they're stuck with it and they don't have a choice, right? And it's theirs. When I talk about uglier babies, I think of the dollar and I think of our energy fuel efficiency vis-a-vis Germany, France, England, a big chunk of the OECD. And yes, we are significantly exposed, and more so than a lot of other industrialized nations, because we do have such high per capita consumption and such absolute consumption.
I'd like to add just a couple comments. First of all, the U.S. imports 1/3 of its energy. Europe imports 2/3 of its energy. So and then you go to Japan, and so I think these issues will be important. I want to say something about this. Is the only place I had some problem with your presentation, because you say we're getting more efficient, and everybody thinks we're getting more efficient, but I'm not sure. Because we've been changing the market basket. We didn't until 1984, and then we started changing the market basket by which we compute inflation, and often in ways that seem to be, let's say, put the books in favor of governments who don't want to have 4% inflation, but in fact want to have 3% inflation, which is okay. This is laid out very nicely in something called shadow statistics. If inflation has been 4% a year, as shadow statistics say, versus 3% a year, there has been zero improvement in the efficiency of turning energy into wealth in the United States economy. I don't know the answer to that question.
I'd love to jump in on this because I also think one of the big reasons we get a bigger bang for our buck on the energy side is because we have transitioned significantly from a manufacturing economy to a service-based economy, and the manufacturing, a lot of it went elsewhere. So when I think about global efficiency, you look at global per capita demand, and that's been relatively flat. So I feel there's been some level of efficiency on that point, but in the United States, it might just be because we had a change in the amount of physical stuff that we're manufacturing.
I agree very much with that.
Okay, on that note, I think I will bring this session to a close. I do have one bit of advice since Jason made this comment about ugly babies. It seems to me that another takeaway we might add is don't have any more. And, you know, I guess it's not a great risk, but also pass the word to your children.
I don't know. I read M. King Hubbard in 1969 when I was, I don't know, 24 or something, and I made a decision not to have any children.
Yeah, well.
And I have none to my knowledge.
I'm a great fan of that myself. I do want to say to thank the panelists for an extremely lively and thank the audience for their participation. And we are adjourned, I think, until tomorrow. Liquid fuel, I believe, is available.
One brief announcement. I run an energy listserv. If you want to be on it, it's all kinds of stuff about once a week. Give me your card with ELS written on the back.
I would also add, if you want to get a trial of my research, come up. I'll give you a card. Thanks.
All right, let's have a big hand for our moderator as well and our panel.